Good evening, councillors, staff, presenters, the press, television, and online viewers. We begin tonight's meeting with an acknowledgement that the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, specifically Mississauga. We would like to acknowledge the North Channel Métis Council also. We say miigwech to thank Indigenous peoples for taking the care of this land from time immemorial. We are called to treat this sacred land, its plants, animals, stories, and its people with honor and respect. Prior to beginning tonight's agenda, I would ask that each councillor who is present via video conferencing to answer the roll call when I call your name. Deputy Mayor Summers.
Present.
Councillor Betty Ann Dunbar.
Present.
Councillor Jim Dunbar.
Present.
Councillor Stephen Wells.
Present.
Councillor H.P. Roy.
Present.
Councillor Jennifer Pastorero.
Present.
Thank you. Tonight we are wearing orange shirts which state "Every Child Matters" as a sign of respect. On September 30th, federal offices, banks, and post offices will be closed to mark the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. This day is set aside as a day to honor all the children who survived residential schools, as well as honor and recognize those who did not return to their families. The new federal statutory holiday coincides with Orange Shirt Day, which was started in 2013 as a way to honor Indigenous children and educate Canadians about the impact the residential school system had on Indigenous communities. Creating a federal holiday was one of the 94 calls to action by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission back in 2015. There is a lot of information on the 94 calls to action. I personally will be reading each one on September 30th. Now, turning to tonight's agenda, I have the agenda as well as the addendum to the agenda, and I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Summers, seconded by Councillor Jay Dunbar. Be it resolved that Council approve the agenda, the closed meeting agenda, and the addendum to the agenda as presented. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you. And are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Other than myself, I have a declaration which I have signed, and that would be on agenda item 18.1. And I've asked Deputy Mayor Summers to take this agenda item when we come to it. Moving on to the adoption of the previous minutes, I have a motion from Councillor Roy, seconded by Councillor Pastorero. Be it resolved that Council adopt the minutes of the regular Council meeting of September 7th, 2021 as presented. All in favor? And that's carried. And is there any business that Council wishes to discuss from those meeting minutes? Seeing no hands raised, I'll move on. We have a public presentation tonight. KPMG is going to be giving us the user fees review, and Chaz, welcome and thank you so much for attending tonight's meeting, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, members of Council. It's my pleasure this evening to present to you the findings of our user fee review. It would have been nice to do this in person, but here we are. So as you can tell, I'm sporting a new COVID hair look. So with that being said, I believe that everyone has a copy of the presentation. On the second slide of the deck is just a bit of an agenda, as we'd like to walk through, how we got to this point this evening, talking about the objectives that were established in our work, the scope of the work that we undertook, talk about key themes, as well as wrapping this up with some potential courses of action on the part of the municipality, and then at that point, I'll answer any questions that you may have with respect to this. On the third slide, in terms of the objectives of this review, there were really three key points here that we sought out to achieve. And the first was to take a look at your current user fees, and to the extent that these could be then revised to provide additional non-taxation revenues to the municipality, as well as establish a reasonable distribution of funding responsibilities. The second was to then identify if there were any additional opportunities for user fees that weren't currently being charged by the town. And then finally, identifying and implementing any common and or leading practices with respect to user fee policies. Your worship, members of council, it was really, one of the things that isn't on this slide from an objective standpoint. One that I will come back to this theme throughout this presentation is that the intention of this review isn't to simply go out and find ways that you can squeeze more out of your ratepayers. It was really to take a look and to ensure that there is an element of fairness in what you do from a user fee standpoint. In terms of the scope of work and what we set out to accomplish, we had 4 major work steps. The first being defining the current state. And this was in large part, a huge part of the analysis that we undertook and looking at trends. And we like to look at trends because user fees, they can be, they're not necessarily something that you can anticipate that they're consistently going to perform how you want them. Perfect case in point is we didn't include 2020 in our analysis. And the reason we didn't include 2020 should be pretty self-evident given that we're all speaking via Zoom. COVID had an immense impact on user fees across multiple areas of your operations. And particularly you look at recreation and how and what you were able to do from a recreational standpoint for several months. So as a result of that, we looked at a 5-year period, not including 2020 because of its, how unique that year was, if you will. The idea though is to then see where revenues have gone. Are they trending in the right direction? Are they remaining somewhat, static, or are they sort of trending in a negative way? We looked at all of that. At the same time, we conducted comparative analysis, and we really looked at the comparative with 2 different lenses. The first lens being pound for pound, what do your user fees look like? What does your bylaw look like? What is the scale and the scope of what you include inside your bylaw in comparison to other municipalities? The second was looking at cost recovery. And this was done in 2 separate ways. One is looking at what does this mean on a per household basis, as well as what is the cost recovery percentage that you're achieving. Because in some cases, you may have a lower cost recovery, you may have a low cost recovery percentage, but you're also at the low end from a per household basis. So taking it and looking at this from a sort of a more comprehensive way. The third is pretty straightforward in that we take all of that analysis and we start to look at how could you change, and are there opportunities that you can do things differently? Are there user fees that may not be there? Are there potential to look at things from not so much from a user fee, but from a policy standpoint? And then finally, reporting, and that's part of what we're doing this evening. On the 5th slide, talking about key themes, and what our user fee really brought us to was the identification of 4 key themes, if you will. And the first is that the cost recovery trend that we saw in our analysis is that user fees have remained relatively constant for the past 5 years that we analyzed. And when I use the word constant, I don't necessarily mean that they didn't grow. And in actuality, the town's financial performance from a non-taxation revenue standpoint was relatively positive in that you would see growth in the areas that we would hope to see growth with respect to user fees. Particular areas that we looked at, what we've seen, and I'll talk about this later on, in your building services, that there has been growth on an annual basis, which is a good thing to see. When we talk about the second theme, this is more of a housekeeping matter, but it's very important in being able to analyze, to take a step back and make sure that you are associating the revenues with the expenditures and getting some sense as to where things belong. And again, this is largely something that is more of an administrative task, but what we did note in our analysis that how the town used to account for user fees has changed, and has changed in a positive way. The third really deals about that comparative piece. And one of the things that we took note of as we were going through this and as we were starting to look at and compare the town of Blind River to its peers is that your user fee bylaw is very comprehensive. It's quite robust. And this is obviously a positive for the municipality and for the organization, in that you have put a lot of time and effort in identifying various services that you provide to residents and to the public in general that you've assigned fees to. And this now provides you with a lot of opportunity then. So if someone is looking for a service, you have a user fee that's assigned to it. The final piece, and this comes back to the theme that I was talking about, your residents and the idea of trying to get more out of them and your users. This really then looks at going forward, in that the idea that user fees should remain flat may not be to the benefit of the organization, and actually it's the opposite, in that you really should be looking at ways that user fees should increase on an annual basis, providing that there is a methodology that you apply to it, and I'll speak to that in greater detail later on. With respect to opportunities for change and potential courses of action, we've identified 7 areas from a non-taxation revenue perspective for your consideration. We look at it with really 2 different lenses. We look at it from a policy lens as well as from a straightforward user fee adjustment. And when we talk about solid waste management, we looked at it really in 2 different ways. And from a policy standpoint is we looked at how other comparators manage the landfill as to how much are you provided when you come to the gate. Are there exemptions? Are there not exemptions? So in looking at this, what we were talking about here is exploring the potential of reducing what you allow in terms of free household waste. And this, your worship, members of council, can become somewhat contentious, as solid waste and garbage is always a hot topic in municipalities. You know, I look to my own, where we've just recently shifted to a bi-weekly collection. So every 2 weeks they pick up household waste. Believe me, it wasn't met without a significant amount of resistance. But with that being said, this is something that would fall in line with common and/or leading practice. So therefore, it's something that we looked at. The other thing that we did note is that the level of the cost recovery target that is currently sort of met by the town is significantly lower than the comparative average, where you're sitting at about 12%, where your peers are around 36. So where this also sort of takes us, though, is looking at that net cost per household piece, and that the town also doesn't have the highest. So again, keeping all of this in mind and looking at potentially adjusting fees. But when we talk about solid waste management user fees, once again, this is about sustainability, and this is about really starting to shift the mindset of your residents as to how much garbage they're producing and trying to fall in line with what we consider to be, leading practice. From a building services standpoint, and inside the report, we flagged this is something that we identified actually when we did the service delivery review, in that the Act provides you with the ability to operate building services at a full cost recovery model. Now, with that being said, there always has to be a bit of a consideration as to how you're going to get there. This isn't something that we would suggest you go overnight. This is incremental, and based on what we've seen from an analytical standpoint, and as I mentioned earlier, your revenues have been increasing on an annual basis, but that doesn't mean that you should not continue to look at your building services fees and increase them to follow along with growth. Closely linked to building is land use planning. And your worship, members of council, in this case, there's evidence based upon the analysis that we did that your fees are significantly lower than your peer group. Where we were talking, when we looked at some of them, site planning is almost 40% lower than just the comparative average. Your official plan amendments are nearly 67% lower than the average. So this really looks at how can you go about in adjusting fees to ensure that that concept of fairness and reasonableness is incorporated inside of your fee structures, and particularly with this area. The other thing of note is that this service is largely being provided by a third party. So it really does then give you an opportunity to take a step back, look at your fees, and adjust them accordingly to fall in line with not only your peer group, but also ensuring that that concept of fairness and reasonableness is now contained within that. We looked at cemetery services, and once again, this is much like solid waste is a bit of a sensitive area, whereas you don't want to be perceived as charging people at, in a lot of cases, their most vulnerable moments. But at the end of the day, this really is to take a look at your fees, which we've done, and look at how you perform in comparison to your peers. Your cost recovery is about 35% lower than the average. So you also have a higher cost per household. So this is that perfect storm that I was talking about earlier, where one could cancel the other out. In this case, you trend towards the higher from a cost recovery standpoint, lower from a cost recovery standpoint, and higher from a net cost per household. So perfect example as to an area where council, you may want to give some consideration to adjusting fees on an annual basis to catch up. You provide services to the public and make use that require you to use your equipment, your infrastructure. One of the things that we've noted and we've provided for your consideration this evening is looking at those user fees and increasing them to fall in line with your peer group, but more importantly, and this is more from a sustainability standpoint, ensuring that those fees have some form of capital replacement component built inside of them to assist in their eventual replacement. And in some cases, when we look at the types of work that you're doing here, and this is me putting on my hat as a resident and as a neighbor, if you're sending out a crew to clean up my neighbor's yard because they haven't bothered to deal with it, frankly, the general public really won't care too much if you're hitting that person with a bill that will actually help the municipality in the long term and replace what you have. The sixth opportunity that we looked at was around the establishment of non-resident user fees. And you already have these built into your recreational services. It's really then ensuring that you explore this a little further and look at and assess where your users are coming from to address that concept of fairness. And your worship, members of council, I apologize in advance if you've heard me go on at great lengths about this in the past, but the concept of a free lunch with those who don't reside in your community who make access to your services is something that we always speak to our municipal clients about attempting to address. And ultimately, what this requires before anything is some homework and taking a look at who are your users, where are they coming from? And then what that's going to ultimately arm you with is a decision as to whether or not this is a fight worth fighting. Because in some cases, I've worked with municipalities where they assumed, well, it's close to 30 to 40%, and it turned out to be 5%. Is it really worth the efforts to establish a fee for 5% of your users? Whereas we worked in other communities where they thought it was closer to 25 and it was nearly 60. That then becomes a different conversation as to how can you go about in ensuring that your residents aren't subsidizing the usage of your facilities to those who don't pay property taxes in your community. The final piece to this, and this is the policy piece that I was speaking to earlier on in the presentation, and that establishing a policy that oversees all of your user fees and ensuring that on an annual basis, each and every department has a structured approach to how they go about in evaluating and then coming forward to council with recommendations as to where there lies potential for growth, if you will. And this isn't meant to become a cumbersome administrative exercise for your staff. This is to establish a policy that would look at how departments evaluate and determine where increases should be, as well as a schedule as to should they or should they not be doing additional analysis. If I look at your corporate services, things such as marriage licenses and things of that nature, the idea of increasing them by 3% on an annual basis to cover inflation, or 4% now would be closer to what we're facing now, doesn't make much sense. Whereas from a recreational standpoint, building services and planning, those are types of areas where those departments may want to be looking on this on an annual basis and providing more analysis and feedback to guide council in deciding whether or not fees need to increase. Your worship, members and council, as I say that statement, I will come back to what I was talking about though. User fees should increase, provided that you can then demonstrate to your residents as to the why. It's not simply an act of applying 4 or 5% for the sake of doing so. It's being able to demonstrate the why. With that, that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chaz. Very informative, and as was the report that you provided for council. Does council have any questions for Chaz? We're awestruck, which is a nice compliment to you. Should there be any questions, we know where you are and we have your email address, so we will definitely get in touch with you. Thank you so much for coming tonight to our council meeting. And I'm sure you will be now glued to the television to find out what the outcome of a federal election is going to be. So we wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you once again, your worship, members of council. And yes, to that extent, you have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you do have any questions with respect to our work. Have a great evening.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All the best. Take care.
And now turning to the introduction and consideration of administrative reports. From the Deputy Clerk, we have the voter view agreement. And I have a motion from Councillor Wells, seconded by Councillor B. Dunbar. Be it resolved that Council authorize the CAO clerk to enter into an agreement with DataFix for access to voter view to manage the voters list for the 2022 election, and that $7,500 be used for the election reserve from the election reserve account, and that future subscription fees be considered in the 2022 budget. Discussion. Councillor B. Dunbar, followed by Councillor Posterero.
I was just wondering if we know what those future subscription fees are going to be and whether it's a yearly fee.
And I will turn it over to Ms. Scott for the answer.
Thank you, Mayor Hagman. So at this time, I don't have an exact amount of what those fees would be, but it would be on a election term update fee when we would be updating the voter list. So this is a tool that's used strictly during election time, and it's for us to track. We can do our own additions to the voter list. We can post it and ensure that residents can log in and see if they're on the voter list. So it's a very good tool that we have not utilized in the past, and this year we would really like to utilize this for this election. We've had a number of residents who show up at the polling stations who are not on the list. So having this tool will enable us to ensure that everyone is on the list and we're tracking them.
Thank you.
Councillor Posterero.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. So this is for the upcoming municipal election in 2022. So the $7,500 figure, that's simply to maintain the voter list?
Through you, Madam Mayor. It's a little bit more complex than just maintaining the voter list, but yes, essentially that's what it does. And it allows us to have the accurate numbers and the accurate data that we can look at, rather than taking it from the paper copies that we have had to use in the past or uploading them through our system. This is a much better tool, and moving forward with the online election process, this will be an essential tool for that purpose.
Councillor J. Dunbar, followed by Councillor B. Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Katie, have you reached out to any other municipalities who have been using this year software, and you know, have they led you to believe of the advantage with it?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. That's a good question. Thank you for that, Councillor Dunbar. Every election that we've gone to training for, this is a highly recommended tool through the training facilitated by usually it's a combination of MPAC and Municipal Affairs that conduct the training, or it's AMCTO. But this is definitely a tool that's highly recommended, and there's a lot of municipalities. There's very few municipalities that don't use it. We're one of the few that do not have this tool.
Thank you. And back to Councillor B. Dunbar. No, question was answered. Okay, Deputy Mayor Summers.
My question just was, you said a lot of municipalities. I'm just wondering, so some similar to the size of ours? Seems like a lot of money for the size of our community, but that's just my question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Summers, during the election, having to fill out all of those forms for people that are not on the election is an inconvenience for some. We've had sometimes people say, like, very frustrated that they have to go through this each and every year. So this is going to speed up time. It's going to ensure that everyone is on the voter list. It will be a tool that's well used. And yes, there's lots of municipalities our size and smaller that use this system.
Go ahead, Deputy Mayor Summers.
Just to follow up then, so once we have the list then, Katie, that would be like our list, and then we would just modify it as we go? Is that what my understanding is?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, essentially that is what we would do, and then we can upload it to our system as well, and it will help with if we're doing mail. So if we're going to do, you know, the phone mail or mail in, or however this tool can be utilized for that. So sending out cards, ballot cards, etc. That would be the use for this as well.
Okay, thank you.
Just a final comment. I see this as a positive move, especially seeing from the last election the names of the voters. There were people that were on that list that had moved away. There were people who were not on the list, and I just remember seeing a lot of names that shouldn't have been on the list. So I think this is an excellent up-to-date tool that will really help both administration as well as those that are seeking elections, and also our voters. So I see a win for everyone. Unfortunately, software is expensive, but it will be something that we can use for years to come, I'm sure. So that's a good news story. So on that note, all in favor of this motion? Opposed? And that's carried. Thank you. And from the Director of Protective Services, read the Canoe Procurement Group. I have a motion on the table from Councillor J. Dunbar, seconded by Councillor H.P. Roy. Be it resolved that Council authorize the Fire Chief to proceed with the preparation of the new ladder truck tender to the LAS/Canoe program. Questions, discussion? All in favor of this motion? And that's carried. Thank you. And under the service delivery review, we have an update for the month of September. Are there any questions in relation to this review? And seeing none, 12 we have no unfinished business. Under correspondence requiring action, we received information on September 7th from the Tay Valley Township re-lottery licensing to assist small organizations. I have a motion from Councillor Pastorero, seconded by Councillor Wells. Be it resolved that Council support Tay Valley Township with the request that the ministry responsible for alcohol and gaming of Ontario to seek their assistance in implementing an additional level of licensing which would permit small organizations to hold fundraisers as a method of sustaining our community and organizations, and that a copy of this resolution be forwarded to the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario and Tay Valley Township. Comments, questions? Seeing none, all in favor of this motion? And that is carried. Thank you. And correspondence for information, we had correspondence from the PUC presentation, read a quarterly water meeting. Any comments on this? Seeing none. September 9th, Ministry of Transportation, read the Connecting Links program. Are there any questions on this correspondence? September 9th, also from the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, read the Site Plan Control Guide.
Madam Mayor, there was a question on the last one.
Oh, I'm
Mr. Roy.
sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Roy. Councillor Roy, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Hagman. I'm just wondering it because I saw Mr. Kennedy today and I know this was a hot spot for him. It was a hot topic about the connecting link. Have they changed it in any way, or are we still doing a 90-10 split when we do get work done on the connecting link?
Ms. Scott has an answer for you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. That is still the same formula with the Connecting Link funds. It's still the 90-10.
Mr. Kennedy, we're happy. Thank you.
And 14.3, the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, read the Site Plan Control Guide. Are there any questions on the guide itself? Councillor Jay Dunbar.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question would be to the CAO. Have we implemented, or do we have our own site plan? Are we utilizing this here? Because it's quite extensive and it gives us a little bit of power here on these planning and building of future houses or businesses or whatever it may be. Are we implementing this, or is this news to us, Katie?
Through you, Madam Mayor, to you, Councillor Dunbar. This was a change in legislation. So we are in fact using the new legislation through the building code and the planning. This is a tool that they've provided to us to utilize when we are reviewing the plans. This will also be part of the review that we are working together with our planner on, where we can clean up some of our planning so that it's more of a streamlined, less red tape for residents who want to build and want to change the zoning of their property. So this is something that is put into legislation, but this is a tool that we can utilize. And we do have some of the forms implemented now, but we are following the legislation.
Are there any other questions on this agenda item? Seeing none. 14.4, the North Shore Health Network Recruitment Committee agenda package for the September 9th meeting. Are there any questions on the meeting? September 16th, North Shore Power Group Board of Directors meeting. And I did request that a copy of all meeting minutes be put on the website for North Shore Power Group. Are there any questions on this meeting? And seeing none. North Shore Power Group Blind River Generating Station monthly report for July. We always know the water is lower, so things are not spinning as we would like them to in the summer months, but we're hoping everything will be back on with the rain that we're going to get tonight and subsequent days. So that concludes our correspondence. I received no notices of motions, and I have no introduction or consideration of bylaws or council reports and announcements. Having said that, we'll move on to the addendum. This is the conflict of interest that I had said earlier, so I will leave the room and Deputy Mayor Summers will take over. Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
In regards to 18.1 from the CAO clerk, clarification on grant applications. Be it resolved that council authorize the CAO clerk to proceed with the application to repair the Indiana tennis courts in the amount of $350,000 to relocate the basketball court currently located behind the community center to the Birch Street location, and to further maximize the funding stream and incorporate the Birch Street baseball field from behind the community center to the Birch Street location across from the Public Works complex at an estimated cost of $200,000, resulting in a total project ask of $580,000, and that existing dollars allocated within the 2021 capital project list be used as both contingency and the municipal contribution plus insurance monies, resulting in $0 additional funding required from the taxpayers. Comments? Councillor Roy.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Summers. On the subject, I know that we probably all got emails from both the tennis players, pickleball club. I got a couple phone calls, requests to meet. I was down at the pickleball on Wednesday. It was quite interesting. I spoke with them, and they were under, they believed that they weren't a private club. And I said, well, if you have a key to the gate and nobody else says you're a private club. So what I would like to see, and maybe we can deal with it at another meeting, but that possibly we do lock these gates at night, but during the day they're open to all the public. And I spoke with the pickleball club, and there were a couple tennis players there as well, and they felt that that would be okay. Seeing that we have arena staff right there who should be able to unlock it in the morning and hopefully lock it in the evening, depending on how late they leave, because some of these clubs have a league at 7 p.m. at night. And at that point, it may become dicey. They were asking for a key. I said, I don't think you need a key for a padlock. Once it's unlocked, right? But I would like to see that, and just for my own, if I can see a show of hands, who would like to see it go that route, I would more than be happy to put my name on this as well. Does anybody else feel that would be a good idea? That we leave it open to the public?
Councillor Betty Ann Dunbar, followed by Councillor Jim.
I agree with you, HP. I think it should be left open to the members of the public, but I think, could we not include some kind of a security system within that funding grant? That may be part of it.
Ms. Scott has her hand up.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor Summers. If we could deal with the motion that's on the table, and then perhaps at a later time, we could discuss how the management of the tennis courts can run. That way we stick to doing the funding. We may or may not be successful at the grant, and at that point we can discuss further the operations of the tennis club. But this should all be a staff report back to council with the options, how this impacts staffing. There's a lot of variables here, so I would like to bring that back in a full report if that's the wish of council.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunbar, did you want? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Summers. First off, I have the recommendation here in front of me, and it says, be it resolved that the Community Services Committee recommends to council.
Oh, okay.
That's the way it's in our agenda package. I don't know what you have in front of you, but it's a recommendation from the Community Services. And I want to start off, Deputy Mayor Summers, thanking the administration and staff for squeezing in a special community services meeting for us, and providing the committee with a lot of the information that you have here before you, here on our agenda package. And we needed, the committee needed this information so that the Community Services Committee could confidently recommend to council this motion that we have here before us.
Okay. So both of mine do not say that. This was updated, was this updated? Like, I don't have that on mine. Katie?
I'd ask Ms. Scott for,
So through you, Deputy Mayor Summers, this is a motion that was deferred from council. So council's re-looking at the motion that was deferred from them.
Mhm.
So this is the motion that was deferred from
So that's
council's
why,
last.
okay, so that's why it reads that way.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
but, and also community services did meet and we did
Yes.
decide that we would want to forward this through. Councillor Pastorero, you had your hand up as well.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. But I do believe that HP has a valid point because under the Trillium grant, the number one rule is that no private membership clubs would be even considered. So if we do want to be successful in this grant, we need to ensure that we tackle that. And so if, and I know there's been lots of debate about if it's private, but if there's a, like HP said, if there's a lock and key, then it's private. And even though they definitely support and allow multiple user groups to use it, I would hope that that would be clarified, especially since it's been in the media. So if we're going to be under a microscope for passing this grant and actually being accepted, I hope that that's clarified prior to people putting their eyes on our application.
Okay, Ms. Scott?
Through you, Deputy Mayor Summers. The tennis club is 100% owned by the town of Glen River. So under the definition in the grant, it would be 100% owned by us. When you look at a paying for use, it's a user fee. So we can essentially say that their $35 that they pay for the year is a user fee that they're giving back to the municipality to form part of the grant. So this is by definition no different than our arena. We have a lock on the arena that we don't let people in unless they have paid to use these services. So this would wholly be part of the earlier presentation from Mr. Anselmo with regard to user fees. And we want to ensure that we're collecting those fees to keep the facility going and not be a burden to the rest of the taxpayers. So by me saying we'd like to bring a full report back, I would like to bring a full report back to council, laying out all of these terms. But as for the grant, I'm quite comfortable in saying this is a 100% owned facility of the town of Glen River, and that there is a user fee per use for the facility.
Thank you, Ms. Scott. Councillor Pastorero?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up, so I'm not misunderstood. I fully support this motion, but I just want to ensure that we're successful because there has been such debate going on social media, in the press, that it is understood that it is town-owned, that it isn't a private club, and that way we will be looked upon favorably by the grant committee so that we're not breaking any of their rules.
Okay.
And it does, there's a statement that I have to give in the grant stating that we do own the facility.
Okay.
We'll be covered.
Councillor Wells, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor Summers. I think that we're probably still looking at two distinct things here. An application for funding, which the Trillium money may not even be approved anyway, and we do have a deadline approaching. And secondly, we are debating the nature of the people, the group that makes use of the facility. As I said earlier, I support the previous recommendation that we passed last November with regard to supporting the tennis club with their application for Trillium funding. On my e-scribe, I just noted I don't have the name of a seconder on mine, but I guess someone has seconded this motion. But I would, due to the significant interest in the community and the media, and to lend weight to this motion, I would like to call for a recorded vote.
Okay. Actually, yeah, I didn't call it actually. I didn't have it. I only have Stephen Wells on here. Can I have a seconder then?
I'll second that,
Okay,
Paula.
all right, thank you. So that would be moved by Stephen Wells, Councillor Wells, sorry, and seconded by Councillor Jim Dunbar. Okay, if we're ready, we'll take the vote now. Oh,
I'll call the
thank you.
vote.
Thank you, Ms. Scott.
Councillor Betty Ann Dunbar,
In favor.
Councillor Jim Dunbar,
In favor.
Councillor Stephen Wells,
In favor.
Councillor HP Roy,
Favor.
Councillor Jennifer Pastorero,
Oh, in favor, sorry, mute.
thank you. Deputy Mayor Summers,
In favor.
and that is carried.
Thank you. You can let Mayor Hagman know that she can come back in.
Deputy Mayor Summers. These chairs are very rolly on these floors. And now moving on to 19, I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Summers, seconded by Councillor B. Dunbar. Be it resolved that council go into a closed meeting at 7:46 p.m. in accordance with Section 239 of the Municipal Act in order to address matters pertaining to personnel, development proposals, and labor relations. All in favor of this motion? And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. If you could enter the new Zoom numbers, and for the rest of the public, we will be back and you can log back in probably about 15-20 minutes time. Thank you. And welcome back, Blind River. I have a motion from Councillor Roy, seconded by Councillor Pastorero. Be it resolved the council resume the open meeting at 8:42 p.m. All in favor of this motion? And that's carried. Thank you. And for those of you who've just joined us, council discussed a development proposal, personnel, and labor relations during the closed portion of our meeting. And I have a motion from Councillor J. Dunbar, seconded by Councillor B. Dunbar. Be it resolved that council accept the report from the Director of Facilities and Community Service regarding the NOHFC intern application, and that council authorize the CAO clerk to make application to NOHFC for an interim position called the Community Event Planner / Partner Liaison for a 12-month term, and that staff be directed to carry out advertising for this role immediately. Questions, comments? All in favor of this motion? And that's carried. Thank you. And I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Summers, seconded by Councillor Pastorero. Be it resolved that council authorize the mayor and CAO clerk to sign bylaw 21-49, being a bylaw of the corporation of the town of Blind River, to adopt the minutes of the meeting of September 20th, 2021, was passed in open council this 20th day of September 2021. All in favor of this motion? And that is carried. And last but not least, I have a motion from Deputy Mayor Summers, seconded by Councillor Roy. Be it resolved that council adjourn at 8:44 p.m. All in favor of this motion? And that is carried. Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening. We'll see you soon.